Hello. So, starting off the year on a weird one, because why not? You may be thinking, well, where's your podcast? Don't do that. You may be thinking, well, where's your goals for last year and this year? And the answer is, my cat peed on my diary while we were moving house. So that's not happening because I don't have it anymore. Moving on. Today I wanted to talk about writing historical novels. Even though I have no intention of writing a historical novel. The closest thing I ever came, and probably will ever come, to writing an actual historical novel is this thing. Not The Fighting Kind. And its sequel, Not the Fainting Kind, which I would hold up, but I don't have it. This isn't out yet. This doesn't come out until April. More information in all of the usual places, particularly on my website, which is linked in the description box below if you want to check it out. Not the Fighting Kind is a pirate novel, and it is ultimately set in a pretend world. It's not actually a historical novel. I was going to put it as like a pseudo-historical novel, like a fully sort of steampunk historical novel, like Gail Carriger. Her Soulless series is set in the real world, but with... Like, it's an urban fantasy novel, so there's paranormal creatures and stuff. This is complicated, and I'm not getting into it right now. But what I ended up doing was I wasn't happy with it being set in the real world, so I ended up just making a very a lot of locations with very veiled, very, very poorly veiled name coverings. So, like, for example, our main character in this is from a place called Enderend. That's the country name, and the city name is Dinium. I'll let you figure those out for yourself, but I'm pretty sure you'll be able to, and that's on purpose. So, anyway, so obviously I decided not to actually make it a historical novel, but I did all the research, all the requisite research that one needs to do for a historical novel. I did research into what the Ton are doing with their days, what an average day looks like for a member of the Ton, a woman and a man, married, unmarried. I did all of that research. I researched what meals looked like. I researched how you would get places. I researched how long it took to get places. I researched how everything worked. And while I wasn't setting it in any actual real places, like I was originally planning on setting it like in England, but I wasn't planning on setting, like, none of the buildings were real buildings that actually exist. None of the family names were real family names that have historically made a name for themselves. Like, I'm sure there are people who have these names because they're just normal names, but that wasn't, like, I'm not purposefully picking anything out. I've named a couple of characters now after my friends, but that's it. And I did all of that requisite research, and there was one thing that completely slipped my mind while I was writing this book, and now that I've finished it and set it in this pretend version of the world instead, much like Joy D'Amour's setting in Hunger Pangs series, it's also designed to emulate aspects of our world that we live in, but it is a completely fantastical world that she's written. And again, she has supernatural characters, which all of the characters that are like main characters in Not That Kind of Dandy series are human people. So just bear that in mind. There's no vampires or werewolves in these books, even though I keep talking about books like them that have vampires and werewolves in. Just anyway. But when it comes to writing historical novels or researching for historical or pseudo-historical novels, which is what I call what I've written, a pseudo-historical novel, I think this slips a lot of other people's minds, and I've just found a couple of really egregious examples of this being a problem, and I wanted to bring it up and like throw it out into the world and see what other people think, whether anybody else cares, and maybe, hopefully, help some people writing Regency novels to not trigger this insane rage that I have about this. Oh, my flags. Anyway, that's going to annoy someone, isn't it? There you go. Anyway, so the thing that I think that nobody researches, and really they should, especially if you're not actually from the UK, is accents. Hold on. In December, I posted to Instagram a reel of Derbyshire Darcy, right? So in Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy's family estate is in Derbyshire, right? It's in the county of Derbyshire. And the face location that it gets in most movies and TV is a place called Chatsworth, right? Which is, I'm not going to say it's in Derbyshire again, because that's clear by now, I think, but it is. I'm going to say it's in Derbyshire. I've been there. I went to their wedding fair to see if I wanted to get married there. I did not want to do that. But it is the face, that like sandstone front giant house, is Chatsworth House. And it's in Derbyshire. Now, I've got plenty of friends from Derbyshire. Purely through happenstance, actually, because I didn't... By the time I made friends with these people, I'd never been anywhere near Derbyshire. But I have some friends who are actually from Derbyshire. And while they don't speak with a really thick Derbyshire accent, I have been to Derbyshire. I've lived near Derbyshire before now. And I've heard the thickest of Derbyshire accents. And I saw a while ago on the internet someone making like a fun, silly joke, I think it was Tumblr, about how funny it would be if Mr. Darcy actually spoke with a Derbyshire accent, because his estate's supposed to be in Derbyshire. So how funny would it be? And like, I'm going to say obviously, but if you don't know, it's not so obvious. Most people of the ton, so like landed gentry, so Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bennet, and pretty much all the main characters of a Jane Austen novel, they are members of the ton, and that's just essentially upper class. It's not called upper class. We're just going to, those people, lords, ladies, and in this period of time, Misters and Mrs., gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, those people, all spoke with received pronunciation. They were given lessons in received pronunciation. That was the proper way to talk, and if you didn't talk with received pronunciation, you would be shunned, essentially. If you had a regional accent in that era and you were a member of the ton, you weren't getting anywhere. So you trained yourself out of it. In the same way I trained myself out of my accent when I was a teenager because no one could understand me. What's this accent you have now, Will? So anyway, so obviously Darcy wouldn't speak with a Derbyshire accent, a regional Derbyshire accent. But it is funny to think about, because a Derbyshire accent is what we call a thick accent, or a wide accent. That's the word, a wide accent. Your vowels are more enunciated in a Derbyshire accent than they are typically in other English accents. We are not touching on Scotland and Wales right now, or Ireland for that matter. We're not touching on those. We're just thinking about England, because it's got to be localised, because nobody gets Scotland right anyway, and that's a whole separate conversation that I could probably talk for hours about. And I don't know enough about Wales to talk like an expert on it, so we're just localising. A Derbyshire accent is a wide accent, and it is distinct from a Yorkshire accent to anyone who has spent any length of time in Yorkshire or Derbyshire. I mean, to be fair, the Yorkshire accent is also very distinct because there are technically 4 Yorkshires. You know how there's like North Carolina and South Carolina and like Virginia and West Virginia? Yorkshires. There are 4 Yorkshires. And the one that is the closest locationally to Derbyshire is South Yorkshire. They literally border each other. Now, South Yorkshire and Derbyshire do have distinct accents, but there is a lot more crossover there because, well, accents typically have that where you cross over with the other people on the boundary border of where you are. So, if everybody speaks with received pronunciation anyway, and it's just funny to think of Mr. Darcy with a thick Derbyshire accent, what's the point of doing accent research, right? What is the purpose of accent research if everybody you're talking about, because you're only talking about members of the ton, speaks with received pronunciation anyway? Here's the thing. a lot of people fall into a very bad habit of writing the lower classes with, these are the official terms, I'm not being a dick, writing the lower classes with thick accents, right? Which is fair and reasonable because a lot of people in that time period who did not get taught to speak with received pronunciation would have spoken with their regional accent. And like, having moved around England and having lived in New Zealand for a while and having lived in Scotland and moved around Scotland, I can safely say that people who speak with their regional accents are more likely to understand you if you speak with something like their regional accent. Like when me and my wife were living in New Zealand, I was very easily understood the entire time I was there because the Kiwi accent is short. That's not the word for it, but it is. It's short vowels. Like all of their vowels are short. New Zealand. I'm trying to think of anything I can say in a Kiwi accent, and I just cannot think of a single thing. But yeah, if you just look up a Kiwi accent. But they have very short vowels, and in Glasgow, which is close to where my family is from in Scotland, not exactly. It's one of those things where I'll pick big cities and be there like, we're in the region of this big city, for privacy purposes. But somewhere in the region of Glasgow in general is where my family's from. So we speak with a sort of wider area of Glasgow accent. So like there's Glaswegian and then there's like the wider area. And those are technically two distinct accents, but not important. But because I could lean into that aspect of my accent, it was very easy for me to communicate with people, whereas my wife, who is from the northeast of England, let's be honest, actually, she's from the general Yorkshire area. The general Yorkshire. Don't say Shire. Let's talk Lord of the Rings, it's Shire, I promise. But yeah, from wider Yorkshire is where my wife is from, wider Yorkshire, and she grew up on an army base. But because she and her family are from wider Yorkshire, they have this wide accent, right? Which means their vowels are quite enunciated. That's a thing that you'll typically see in the wider Yorkshire area. And she found it very difficult to be understood. People in New Zealand kept asking her to repeat what she was saying over and over again because there's this distinction where the wideness of her accent, the length of her vowels, made the words too difficult for those people in New Zealand to understand because they've not been massively exposed to a Yorkshire accent. Why would they have been? And that's how accents work, basically, is what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that these different areas making you more or less understood is valuable information when one is writing accents into novels. And obviously, like I said, people are more likely to understand accents similar to their own than they are to understand accents very distinct from their own. Like, that's just a thing. Accept me at face value. I've given you the anecdote. This is a statement now. And so when people who are not being taught to speak with received pronunciation are speaking to people who are also not speaking with received pronunciation, they are more likely to gain the accent and they're more likely to keep the accent of their region. There's also not a lot of movement for people of the working classes in the Regency era or the Victorian era. I'm talking Regency because most people set things in the Regency era for a lot of these kinds of novels. And because the novel that I read that made me think of this in the first place was set in the Regency era, and because somebody that I follow online is writing a series of romance novels set in the Regency era. So it's not a lot of movement for people, which means that the accents are more distinct and more specific and more likely to be sustained in a way that is less likely in this day and age because there is a lot more movement around the UK. Like, for example, again, using myself as an example, my mum is from England, my dad is from Scotland, and then they are divorced, and I had to split my time between a specific place in England and a specific place in Scotland. Yes, the wider Glasgow area. Or like near Glasgow, that I had to split my time between these two places, and therefore my accent became a very jumbled mess of these two places until I decided I was tired of not being understood and I taught myself out of it. a bit sad when you think about it, isn't it? If you think too hard, it's a bit sad. But I know plenty of other people who have done the same thing, who've come to like university, for example. I mean, I did this before university, but people who've gone to university, for example, and they've moved quite far away from home, like I did. And they've gone to university and people have struggled to understand them, or like made a lot of fun of them for their accents, because that's still a thing. And they've taught themselves out of their accents. And a lot of us are quite sad about having let that happen to ourselves, because we're like, I miss my accent. I miss my ridiculous, completely not understandable accent. I wish I could still do it. I wish I could demonstrate it to people when I talk about it, but I can't because, well, I can't. And like, I can do each of the individual accents separately, but that's not the same thing. But when it comes to writing your Regency novel, I know this has been long-winded, and I'm sorry, I'm still getting back into this whole YouTube thing, and I'm having to film it on my phone. It's a whole fiasco. But when it comes to writing your Regency novel, you may be thinking, no, that's it. When it comes to writing your Regency novel, a lot of people fall into the bad habit of writing these people who are not members of the town, serving staff, or people who work in inns, or ruffians trying to have their way with gentle women who are like unaccompanied in places, which is absolutely wild because that would never happen. And they write these characters with these sort of accents that I'm pretty sure they're copying and pasting from somewhere else. I don't think people are writing these accents based on listening to people talk. And I definitely don't think they're writing these accents based on listening to people talk in the area that they're actually basing their story in. So this book that I've read recently, or read the sample of recently, was really good aside from these small egregious errors. And the big one that really upset me was the accent, because this author has picked a real place for these characters to go to. This character has gone from Cheapside, London, which is a real place, to Carrington. Okay? And if you know which book it is based on that, please don't share, because I'm not trying to name and shame the author. I'm just specifying that it's Carrington, because Carrington, I was like, is that a real place? So I looked it up on Google Maps, as I am wont to do, because I always want to know if people have set things in real places. And it is. It's in Manchester. It's near the Warburton's bread factory, actually. Not super near, but it's near Warburton, where the Warburton's bread factory is. And Carrington is a real place, and has been a real place for a long time. Longer than Warburton. And it's a real place in Manchester. I know I keep emphasizing this point, but it's worth the emphasis. It's a real place in Manchester, which means that the people who are living there and being poor, or whatever it is they're doing, sitting in the inn that the main character is in, while she's waiting for her next stage of travel, which is only going to take her a little way down the road, they don't speak with a Mancunian accent, these characters. They're written to have an accent. The accent is written in word for word, and there's a lot of discussion that could be had there about classism and the difficulty and danger of bigotry in writing in an accent in the first place. Accents and dialects are two different things. But I'm not going to get into that right now, because actually what I want to get into is, if you're going to do this, if you're going to have a character speak with a localized dialectic accent, and you want to write that in, that is your decision to make. I think you should make it while being well informed about the potential repercussions of this, and the possibility that you are continuing biases that have existed for many, 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 many years, and whether you want to be part and parcel of that. But your decision. But if you are going to write the accent in, could you at least do it with the actual accent that people actually have in the area that you've decided to set it in? If you've like this author genuinely has picked a real place and then not written the accent that matches that place. And I don't know if she just thinks that like nobody's going to care, or nobody from that place is going to read this book. And like, I'm not from Cannington. I'm not Carrington. I'm not from there. But you only have to travel about an hour to get to where I went to school. I'm not saying in which direction. So I know what a Mancunian accent sounds like. I know what it scans as if you write it as a real accent. And this is not it. Like, I looked at the way these characters had been written and I couldn't parcel it out. Parse it out. And I handed it to my wife and I said, "Can you please read this in the accent it's written in?" And she said, "Yeah." And what came out of her mouth was a very confusing amalgamation of South London and Yorkshire. Those are quite distinct from one another, typically speaking. So these characters who are supposed to be from Manchester are speaking with South London Yorkshire accents. And I just kind of lost my mind a little bit. I was peeved. I was upset by it because it's frustrating to have that happen, to have people seemingly care so little about people from places that are outside the big city. I don't know why I said that in such a deep voice and big city of London, or like even the smaller cities that people care to visit. Like some people, like quite a lot of people go to Manchester. It's a nice place. It's got one of the biggest airports in the UK. Like, it's a nice place. And it just frustrates me that apparently this author wanted to write in an accent but couldn't be bothered to do it justice, and that this has gone through, like, this is a traditionally published book. This has gone through like publishing house editors. Like, I'm reading the British release of it because I live in the UK. I'm reading the version that's gone through an editor here to make sure that it's still okay to adapt it so that you don't say fanny and mean butt. That's just an example. Like, that's not what it means here. It means vagina in the UK. Anyway, and like, it's just frustrating to be faced with that when I know that so many people who write historical novels do so much research, to then be faced with the idea that like, again, one of the people I follow online has been researching floor plans from the specific era in a place that still exists, and making sure that the floor plans that she's got match up with the floor plans in the era and not just the modern floor plans. I mean, most historical houses have the same layout as they did. Like, if it's a protected historical site, most of them still have the layout. The rooms are still titled as the rooms they originally were, not the rooms they are now. Like, if you went somewhere and you were like, "Hey, where's the library?" Or like, you could go in somewhere and read a plaque on a door that says the library, and you could go in and it's not arranged like a library at all, and you'd be like, "Why is this called the library?" And they're like, "Oh, it used to be the library back when, and we have to keep it called the library for protective measures, like historical protection, but it's not actually the library anymore." Like, in my high school was an A-listed building, so A-list in the UK means that you can't do anything to it. Basically, you can't, like, you have to write to your local historical protection board thing to redo the carpets, for example. And like, our classrooms were all named after what those rooms originally were, and like, we all called them different things because they were classrooms. So like, we would be there like, "Oh yeah, let's go into the music practice rooms," and it's like, well, technically the music practice rooms are the servants' quarters, and it's like, okay, I don't care. I don't care, because what I actually want to do is find the rooms to practice music in, and that kind of thing. And like, there were bathrooms everywhere in that building because there were ones for like like different people in the house were allowed to use different bathrooms at different times, and they'd obviously had to be retrofitted to be allowed to be used as a school. But basically you couldn't do anything to that building. So everything was still titled with what it had been originally. Our library, back when we were allowed to use the upstairs of the building before it got closed, our library used to be the lady of the house's bedroom, or like, it's complicated because obviously families are complicated, but it used to be like lady of that. I'm not saying what it was because her name is obviously, I'm not doxing myself by saying the name of the room, because like the name of the lady of the house, because that will tell you what the building was. But it's the Lark's bedroom, and we used to have to call it that, and we used to have to be there like, oh, you weren't allowed to say, oh, I'm going to go to the library. You'd have to say, oh, I'm going to go to the lady's bedroom, and that kind of thing. And like, God, I could tell you stories about places I took exams in that building. But the point is that a lot of places still use those same titles, depending on how historically protected the particular building is. And I think it's commendable that she's doing this research, that she cares this much, and she recognises that the vast majority of readers probably won't care this much about whether the floor plans are accurate or not. But she cares, and she knows that it's going to matter to some of them, and she wants to cater to those people. And I think that's really admirable. And that's also part of the reason that I decided not to make this set in the real world. And the other part was, of course, I want people to be able to travel faster. But anyway, but to think that people can put that much effort into making sure that the floor plans are accurate, but they can't do enough research into, like, corsets don't hurt, and you wouldn't wear a corset in the Regency era anyway. You'd be wearing stays, which is a different thing, and they absolutely don't hurt because of what they're made out of. And that people will set things in specific locations, real actual places where real actual people live, and just won't bother to put in the effort to make sure they sound like the real actual people that live there. So, TLDR, or TLDW, I suppose, is if you're going to write in if you're going to write in a regional accent in a Regency novel, or really a regional accent in any novel, research it. Listen to people from there. Find like people talking about that specific accent. How do those people write it down? Brian Jacks, for example, as a really random pulled out of my ass example, Brian Jacks, who writes the Redwall books, grew up near Liverpool Docks. I think it was his dad worked there. Fact check me on that. But either way, very familiar with Liverpool Docks and Liverpool Dockland workers, and wrote the Liverpool Docker accent, specific thing, into his novels, into his Redwall books for a specific set of people, right? And my wife had no idea about that when she was a kid. She was the one that read them as a child. She had no idea that that was a thing when she was a kid, because she'd never been to that side of the country. And she didn't know that much about Brian Jacks because she was a child reading a book. You don't do that much research. And it wasn't until she showed me the books when we were adults and we were moving into a real house together that I looked in these books at all, and I was like, it's not really my jam. They're not really my jam. But she showed me this specific accent written in, and I was like, oh yeah, I know what that is, because I'm familiar with it, because Manchester and Liverpool are not far apart, and I didn't technically live in either one of those places, but I used both as examples of the big city near where I grew up. And it's he's so familiar with the accent, it's safe to write it in. And if you wanted to emulate that, to have a Liverpool Docker accent, that's a great resource, because he actually does it justice. If you are looking for resources for writing a Scottish accent well, which obviously we haven't touched on because I was only talking about England, but if you're looking for resources to do Scottish accents well, reading Scottish authors is the best way to go. And it's just, I don't know, it's just frustrating, I guess, to keep seeing this happen over and over again when it's just so inaccurate. Like, the other thing, of course, is that if you don't want to put the research in, I mean, I can't make you. If you don't want to put the research in and you don't really know how to write a regional accent, you can just say that they spoke with one. You're allowed to say that. You're allowed even to say it in like a disparaging manner if that's how the main character would view it. You're allowed to have the words written out in a traditional, expected way, and then have the main character mentally think that this person is speaking with a lowbrow accent, or their vowels are drawn out in an unpleasant way or something. They're allowed to have opinions about the accent without it being your opinion about the accent. And you're allowed to just write in a description. You don't have to do the actual, like, changing the actual words to look like they should sound like the accent, because that is, like I said, really hard to pull off and has a lot of unpleasant connotations. If you would like to read my non-historical books, you can check out any of these. They're already out. So I've got the Guardian Cadet series, Welcome to Humanity, and Unlicensed Delivery. Or if you're looking for more information about Not the Fighting Kind, you can find it on my website. As with those, you can find those on my website too. Link is in the description box below, along with a link to all of my social media accounts and anywhere else you can find me on my mailing list to be the first to hear about everything. And I have nothing else to say, so I'm gonna go. Bye!